Brought to you by Penguin. The Earned Life. Lose Regret, Choose Fulfilment. By Marshall Goldsmith and Mark Reiter. Read by Marshall Goldsmith.
To Dr. Roosevelt Thomas, 1944 to 2013, for his insights and support, and Anique Lafarge for bringing us together. Presume not that I am the thing that I was. Henry V, William Shakespeare. Introduction. Some years ago, during the George W. Bush administration, I was introduced to a man named Richard at a leadership conference. Richard was a business manager for artists, writers, and musicians. Several mutual acquaintances had told me Richard and I had much in common. He lived in New York City, where I had just bought an apartment, and we agreed to get together for dinner the next time I was in town. At the last minute, he bailed out for no apparent reason. Oh well. A few years later, during the Obama administration, we finally got together for dinner and, as friends had predicted, immediately hit it off. Lots of spirited discussion and laughs. At some point, Richard expressed contrition about canceling on me way back when, imagining all the good times and jovial meals we'd missed out on during, as he put it, those wasted years before we met. He was joking about the wasted years, of course, but he couldn't conceal a shade of melancholy, as if he'd bungled a life decision that required an apology. He'd periodically repeat that note of contrition the 2 or 3 times a year we'd get together in New York. Each time I'd say, "Let it go, I accept your apology." Then, during one of our dinners, he told me a story. He had just graduated from high school in a Maryland suburb. An indifferent student, and not yet interested in college, he enlisted in the U.S. Army. After 3 years of service at a military base in Germany, rather than combat deployment to Vietnam, he returned to Maryland, determined to get a college degree. He was 21 and finally clear-eyed about his future. He spent the summer before his freshman year driving a cab around the Washington, D.C. area. One day, his fare from the airport to Bethesda was a young woman, a student at Brown, returning from a year of study abroad in Germany. We had an hour in traffic to compare notes about Germany, Richard explained. It was one of the most charming hours of my life up to that point. There was definitely chemistry in that cab. When we pulled up to her parents' very large house, I carried her bags to the porch, stalling so I could figure out my next move. I wanted to see her again, but a driver asking a passenger out on a date was frowned upon. So I did the next best thing. I wrote my name on a taxi company card and smoothly said, "If you need a ride to the airport, call the dispatcher and ask for me." She said, "I'd like that," making it sound like we were already agreeing to a date. I floated back to the cab, high on the possibilities. She knew how to reach me, and I knew where she lived. We were connected in some small way. As Richard spoke, I was sure I knew where his story was going. It was the raw material for nearly every romantic comedy I'd ever seen. Girl and boy meet. One of them loses a name or number or address. The other waits in vain to hear from them again. By happenstance, they run into each other years later and reconnect, or some variation thereof. She called a few days later, and we set up a date the next weekend, Richard continued. I drove to her house and stopped 3 blocks away to collect myself. This evening was important to me. I could see spending my life with her, despite the fact that she came from a much more well-to-do background than mine. And then I did something inexplicable. I froze. Maybe it was the big house or the swanky neighborhood, or the fact that I drove a cab.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?